Hello, here is your video going over the second half of the Algebra 3-4 Spring Final Exam Review, and this video goes over problems 22 through 43. So problem number 22 is the start of the statistics unit. So let U, actually this was the probability unit, let U be the set of all integers from 1 through 15, let A be 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and B is 1, 3, 11, 13, 15. The set 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15 can be described as, so you need to remember the difference between the union and the intersection. So this right here, this symbol, is the intersection, and then this symbol is the union. So the intersection is what the two sets have in common, the union is putting those two sets together. And then the apostrophe means not, so letter A says it's not the intersection of A and B, and C says it's not the union of A and B. So those would be all of the elements that were not part of the intersection of the union. But if you look at this set, it includes everything in A and B, so that's the union. So then that's going to be letter D, the union between the sets. 23, you spin a lettered spinner shown below. Event A is landing on a vowel. Event B is landing on a consonant. What is the intersection of A and B? So A is going to be the set of vowels, and B is the set of the consonants. So that's B, C, D, and F. And we want to know the intersection of these two. Well, you don't really have a vowel that's a consonant, so that's the empty set, which is letter A. For 34, which of these events is not an independent event? So non-independent means that it is dependent. So dependent means your scenarios are changing. So 3 yellow marbles are picked from a bag of 8 blue marbles and 8 yellow marbles without replacement. So that means when I'm taking a marble out, I am not putting it back in. So that means it changes the bag of marbles. So that one is not independent. So that's going to be A. If you look at the other scenarios, your scenarios don't change. So 3 yellow marbles are picked from a bag of blue marbles with replacement. So that means you're putting it back. So that means the bag of marbles doesn't change. And then a 12-sided die is rolled twice. Well, the dice is not changing each time you roll it, and neither is the quarter. So letter A is the only one that's a dependent event, or not an independent event. For 25, for 2 independent events, C and D, the probability of C is 0.25. The probability of D is 0.7. What's the probability of C and D? So since these are independent events, that's the key word right there, since they're independent, you can multiply the two probabilities together. So I have 0.25 times 0.7 is 0.175, which is letter B. The next problem, suppose 2 events A and B are independent. So again, we know they're independent. The probability of A is 0.15. The probability of B is 0.05. What is the probability of A given B? The probability of A given B. So the probability of A given B, to calculate it, it's the probability of the intersection. So it's A and B over the probability of, I think it's the probability of A. Okay, so let's see here. So the probability of A and B, since it's independent, I can go ahead and multiply those two. So that's 0.15 times 0.05 divided by the probability of A. Actually, I wrote this down wrong. So it's the probability of A and B, so the intersection over the probability of B. Sorry about that. I knew it was wrong when I wrote it down. So the probability of B is 0.05. So if you look at this, your 0.05s cancel, so that's just 0.15, which is A. All right. The table shows data for a poll of 40 randomly selected people for their preference of car colors in the United States, sorted by men's and women's preferences. Find the probability of other given women. So you're given probabilities using a frequency table. This right here is going to be the row or column that you're looking at. So I'm looking at the row of women. And of those women, I need to know how many selected other. So that's 11 out of the 20 women. So 11 divided by 20 is 0.55 or 55%. Kelly randomly chooses a card from a standard deck of 52 playing cards. What is the probability that she chooses an ace or a jack? So how many aces do you have in a deck of cards? You have 4. So the probability of choosing an ace is 4 out of 52. Plus the probability of choosing a jack is also 4 out of 52. Do you have any aces that are jacks? No, you don't. So I can just add these two probabilities together. So that's 8 out of 52. Let's reduce that, because we always want it as a reduced fraction. So that's 2/13, which is letter C. There are 15 runners in a race. How many ways are there to get first, second, third, or fourth? So I'm looking at these places, so first, second, third, or fourth. How many runners can get first place? That's 15. Once you have someone in first place, they obviously can't get second place, so that's 14. And then 13 left for third place, and then 12 left for fourth place. So let's go ahead and multiply all of those together. And that is 32,760, which is letter B. All right. Shannon scored an 86 on her final exam. The average score for the final in her class was 78% with a standard deviation of 7.6. What is the z-score of Shannon's grade? So to calculate the z-score, you're looking at your piece of data, which is Shannon's score, which is 86, minus the mean, which is 78. Oh, that was a weird looking 7. Divided by the standard deviation, which is 7.6. I'm going to put that into my calculator, and that gives me about 1.05. So her standard deviation is A. 31, a manufacturer finds that the life expectancy of its best-selling refrigerators is 25 years. The standard deviation is 1 year. The life expectancies are approximately normally distributed. What percent of the dishwasher models lasts from 24 to 28 years? So since I know that it's normally distributed, I'm going to go ahead and draw a normal curve. My mean is right in the middle, which is 25. And then the standard deviation is 1, so I'm going to add 1. So that's 26, 27, 28. And I'm also going to subtract 1. So your normal distribution has 3 standard deviations in both directions. And what I'm looking for is I want to look for 24 to 28 years. So I'm looking from here to here. So I need to know what those percents are. So in the middle is 34 and 34. The next set is 13.5 and 13.5. The next set is 2.35 and 2.35. And your next set of parentheses is 0.15. So I'm just going to total up the percents that I have from 24 to 28. So that's a 34, 34, 13.5, and 2.35. So 34 plus 34 plus 13.5 plus 2.35 is 83.85, which rounds to about 84%. So your answer for that is C. All right, a flower shop's records indicate that the mean height of their tulips is 25.4 centimeters with a standard deviation of 2.6. Assuming a normal distribution, estimate the percent of tulips with a height less than 20.2 centimeters. So again, I'm going to draw that normal distribution, and I'm just going to total up the percents that meet the constraints of the problem. So your mean was 25.4. I'm going to add my standard deviation, so 25.4 plus 2.6 is 28, plus 2.6 is 30.6, plus 2.6 is 33.2. And then I'm going to subtract, so 25.4 minus 2.6 is 22.8, minus 2.6 is 20.2, minus 2.6 is 17.6. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for less than 20.2 centimeters. So I'm looking from here to here. So again, using the percents from the normal distribution, this is 0.15 and this is 2.35. So when I add those two together, it's about 2.5%. So D. All right, the Tempe Union High School District School Board wants to interview students in their school district to get feedback on their schools. They mail a letter asking for students to participate in an interview with the members of the school board. 200 students sign up to participate in the interviews. What type of sample is this? So you have stratified, convenience, self-selected, and clustered. This one is going to be self-selected, because it's getting mailed to you and you get to decide whether or not that you want to submit, whether or not you want to participate in the interview. So you're self-selecting yourself, essentially. Janessa wants to know how many of her peers know the historical significance of Cinco de Mayo. She sits in the school cafeteria and asks students who walk by what Cinco de Mayo means. What type of sample is this? This one is convenience. It's convenience because it's convenient for Janessa to just sit there and ask people who walk by what Cinco de Mayo means. So we have self-selected and convenience. Let me explain what the other ones mean. Stratified is when you're breaking up into groups and you're randomly selecting from each group. So for example, if you think about your school, you have sophomores, juniors, seniors, and freshmen. If I were to randomly select students from each of those grades, that's a stratified sample. Cluster is when you're still separated into groups, so it's similar to stratified, but instead of just randomly selecting from each group, you're picking the entire group. So if I wanted to look at the entire freshman class or the entire sophomore class, instead of just randomly selecting from each class, that's a cluster. So you do have to know the difference between those, otherwise you can't really answer these questions. 35, a student in ASU's teacher mentoring program wants to know if group activities help students learn. He visits a teacher's classroom once a week for 1 semester, taking notes on learning topics, student grouping, and student understanding. Is this an experiment or an observational study? This one is an observational study, so you're picking between A and B. It's an observational study because they're observing. So the student gathers data instead of applying a treatment, so that's going to be letter A. A treatment is essentially what you're doing for an experiment. So that's the difference between observational study and experiment. An experiment, you're actually doing something. An observational study, you are just observing and making notes of what is happening without interfering. All right, based on recent manufacturing tests, a coffee machine claims that 3 out of every 1,200 machines are defective. 10,800 machines were tested. Predict the number of machines that were defective. So if I know that 3 out of every 1,200 is defective, I'm going to go ahead and change that to a decimal. 3 divided by 1,200 is 0.0025. And I know that there are 10,800 machines that were tested. So of those 10,800 machines, I want to know what portion is that 3 out of 1,200. So I'm going to multiply that by the 0.0025, which is 27. So 27 machines. All right, 37. When Mr. Hendrickson was in college, he had an internship with the New York Giants football team. One of his responsibilities was to find out how the community felt about his team. Which of these methods would be the best to get a representative answer? Asking the people he sees wearing New York Giants jerseys, selecting every 5th person who enters a sporting goods store, selecting people in the library during the Super Bowl, or select people randomly from a list of community residents. That would be letter D. The reason why it's not A is because those people are obviously fans of the New York Giants. It's not going to be B because people entering a sporting goods store enjoy sports. So they might be fans of the New York Giants, and it's not going to be C because people in the library during the Super Bowl obviously don't care about football. Or maybe they're just that studious that they would rather study instead of doing this, watching the Super Bowl. But either way, that's not going to give you a representative sample. So the correct answer is D. All right, the bar graph represents the housing prices over a 2-year period. Why may this graph be misleading? The graph is misleading because there aren't enough years. The graph is misleading because the bar graph is not an appropriate choice for this set of data. The graph is misleading because the vertical axis does not start at 0. The graph is misleading because the vertical axis is not scaled evenly. Let's see. The correct answer for that is C. So it looks like there's a big jump from 80,000 to 82,000 when in really that's just 2,000 in the average housing price. So that's not a huge jump, but because it's not scaled at 0, it makes the bars look very different from each other. And the graph is the vertical axis is scaled evenly because you're going from 80 to 81 to 82. So it's because it doesn't start at 0. All right. The line graph represents the number of students enrolled at a high school over a 5-year time period. Why is the graph misleading? The graph is misleading because there aren't enough years. The graph is misleading because a scatter plot is not an appropriate choice for this set of data. The graph is misleading because the vertical axis does not start at 0. The graph is misleading because the vertical axis is not scaled evenly. And the horizontal axis also skips 2004. Let's see, so let's look at the scaling. It doesn't start at 0, but it goes from 1,000, 1,500, 20, 25, 30, and then it goes to 40, 50, 60, 70, 100. So the y-axis is not scaled correctly, and we're also missing 2004. So the correct answer for that is D. All right, 40 and 41. So for 40 and 41, you're doing these on the calculator. I'm going to go ahead and write out the keystrokes at the top of this slide so you remember what to do. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to hit Stat and then Edit. And you're going to put the data into the calculator. So the first column is your L1, second column is L2. L1, L2. Now what you're looking for is you're looking at different types of regression. So once you have the data in there, you're going to hit Stat and you're going to select Calc. And what you're looking for is you're looking for linear regression, which is number 4. You're also looking at quadratic regression, which is number 5. You are looking at exponential regression, which is number 0. And you're looking for logarithmic regression, which is number 9. It's the one that says ln for natural log. And what you're looking for is you are comparing the r-squared values. Whichever one is the closest to 1, that's the model that best represents the data. Now, as you're looking at the r-squared values, if for some reason the r-squared values does not show up on the calculator, it's because your stat diagnostics was not turned on. So always make sure stat diagnostics is turned on, and that's going to be in the mode. So double check that. Okay, so you're putting that into your calculator and then you're comparing the r-squared values. So for 41 with the linear function, your r-squared value is 0.6372. For the quadratic function, it's 0.9711. For the exponential function, it's 0.9821. And for the logarithmic function, you get an error. So you're looking for the one that's closest to 1, which in this case is the exponential function, so your answer for that is going to be C. For 41, you're doing the same thing. The r squared value for the linear function is 0.947. For the quadratic function is 0.997. For the exponential function, it's 0.916. And for the logarithmic function again, you get an error. So the r squared value that's closest to 1 is going to be b, the quadratic function. So that means it's the one that best matches the data. Alright, 42. If f of x equals 2x squared and g of x equals 4x minus 1, what is f of g of x? So that's the composition of functions. So you're going to start with f of x first. So I have f of x equals 2x squared. And that is going to get plugged into the g function. So now I'm finding g of 2x squared. So I'm going to take 2x squared and plug it in for x into the g function. So that's 4 times 2x squared minus 1 is 8x squared minus 1. So your correct answer for this is D. Now this open circle right here means the composition. It does not mean multiplication. So you're not multiplying your two functions, you're taking the composition. You always start with the function that's closest to that x, and then you're taking that and plugging it into the next function. 43 is a piecewise function, so I have trying to find f of 1 with this function right here. So you first need to figure out where 1 falls into these categories. So for the first one, it says if x is less than negative 1. Well, 1's not less than negative 1, so you're not going to use this one. The next one says if negative 1 is less than or equal to x is less than 1. Well, again, 1 does not fall within that interval, so it's not going to be this one. And the last one says if x is greater than or equal to 1. Well, is 1 greater than or equal to 1? It sure is. So that means I'm going to take that 1 and plug it into this function. So I have 2 times 1 plus 3, which is 5. So your correct answer for that is letter C. Alright, so that concludes the final exam review video going over questions 22 through 43. Good luck studying for your final.